You're listening to Think Deep,
a podcast by the Deep-Ocean Stewardship Initiative.
We are a global network of experts
working at the intersection of science,
policy, and community
to guide stewardship of the deep ocean.
Through engagement with policymakers,
building global capacity,
and fostering collaboration.
Our core team and ambassadors
help shape policies that protect deep ocean ecosystems,
which are vital to sustaining life on Earth.
Join us as we dive into the science,
governance, and stories shaping the future of our ocean.
Welcome back to Think Deep, decoding deep ocean science and policy. In this series, we are taking you behind the scenes to explore how scientific research influences decisions, laws, and protections for the deep ocean. Join us as we dive into the science, the challenges, and the people working toward a sustainable ocean future. I'm your host, Michelle Guraieb, an oceanographer with a passion for the deep ocean and its connection to our lives. In this episode, we are wrapping up Season 1 by reflecting on what we have learned and what still lies ahead. Today, I'm joined by two of the people who've been involved behind the scenes in developing this podcast. We will be debriefing about all the topics we've covered in this season so far, and we will be looking at the wider context of deep ocean governance from the perspectives of three early career researchers. With us, we have Elin Thomas, a deep sea biologist and science communicator who currently works as the communications manager for DOSI. Welcome to the show, Elin.
Hi, Michelle.
And we also have Eesha Rangani, a public policy master's student in the Global School of Policy and Strategy at UC San Diego. A fun fact about Eesha is that she got to name a deep sea worm as a master's student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Welcome to the show, Eesha.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having us.
I'm so excited to have you both here with me today. So I wanted to start first by talking to you about our first introductions to deep ocean governance or conservation research. Because as you know, and I would love to share this with everyone listening, this podcast came up after Eesha and I went to COP27, which is the UN Climate Change Conference. That year, COP27 was held in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, a beautiful place by the Red Sea. And during these negotiations, during this conference, it was sort of very clear that there was a divide between the policymakers and the scientists. And it was not very clear how scientists would get the information that they needed to the policymakers. And so after the conference, I talked to Eesha because we already knew each other and we were friends. And I said, we should start a podcast. And we should do it with DOSI, the Deep-Ocean Stewardship Initiative, to bring more conversations about the deep ocean and policy to the forefront and to help communicate all the important things to policymakers and the public. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
Yeah, I would definitely like to echo what Michelle said. I was very excited going into COP because, first of all, I was traveling for work and I was going to an international climate conference. But as someone from a science background, I myself found feeling lost in this space because I think there's a lot of technical language when you go to any of the UN conferences. And it was very clear that there is a very big disconnect between science and policy. And as scientists, we're not usually taught how to get around language of policy. And I also think that especially today, in today's political climate, it's become very evident that neither science or policy can function without the other. And there's such an urgent need to create coherence between the two.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something that I noticed this kind of disconnect too, but maybe in a different way. So between kind of the conservation and management approaches that are available to us and how we actually approach using them for the deep ocean. So there's often an assumption that we don't have enough data to be able to apply management tools in the deep ocean. Management tools are often developed in terrestrial and coastal systems. And yes, it's true that there is a data limitation, but the truth is that a lot of these tools are designed to incorporate uncertainty. And, we can't just sit around and wait until we have enough data. What is enough data? And kind of my first experience of working with this was with the IUCN Red List. So that's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Red List of Threatened Species. And this is a tool that was developed to assess the extinction risk of all species on Earth. And so we were looking at how we can apply that and assess the extinction risk of deep sea species. And it was something that had never been systematically done before. And so it was through that I became very interested in how we can apply tools like the Red List to species in the deep ocean instead, which may be more data limited, but it's necessary.
Yeah, so even with limited data, there are still ways to make informed management decisions for deep sea species, and we shouldn't let uncertainty stop us from acting. Let me say that that's such an important mindset for deep ocean work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what deep ocean stewardship is all about.
And on that note, some of our speakers throughout the series talked about stewardship a lot and how to bring our values into our work. So what does stewardship mean to you both, to us?
I grew up in a landlocked city in India, so it was really hard to understand what the deep sea holds and that there's so much life that resides there. But then I went on to get my degree in marine biology, and that's what made me very passionate about the deep sea. And like John Copley said in the first episode, how we care for the deep sea is sort of a reflection of our values. And I think it is important for my values to protect the deep sea because I view it as sort of one of the last pristine places for our generation. And for me, stewardship means bringing science into policy spaces like the climate conference or any other conference, and making sure that protecting the deep sea is grounded in justice, care, and also long-term thinking. And we're not just thinking about extraction, we're thinking about preservation.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, Eesha. And I think working in this science to policy space has also made me realize how important it is to recognize how interconnected the world is and how we can't really just be looking at one environment in isolation from another. So like even the deep sea, it's perceived as this dark and distant thing that can't possibly have any bearing on our lives quite often. But for effective stewardship, we need to stop thinking about the deep sea in isolation from other environments on Earth.
Yes, and this is exactly what Anna Metaxas was talking about in episode 2, where she described an assessment that she'd been working on that looked at water, biodiversity, climate, food, and health, and how everything is interconnected. And you can't really look at one problem and try to solve it separately. You need to look at biodiversity and climate together, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I'd quite like to share is that I was involved in organizing a science symposium recently on behalf of DOSI. And the symposium focused on a specific marine region between Australia and New Zealand. But because the symposium was focused on a region rather than a specific topic, like just on deep sea biology, we really got to paint a fuller picture of the region. So from the geology and the ocean currents to the ecology of seabirds, migratory species and coral reefs and the deep sea habitats. So you got a picture of the system as a whole. And things like that are going to be much more useful going forward when you're discussing the stewardship of the region, having that holistic view.
Totally understanding the whole ecosystem, all of the different ecosystems and how they affect each other.
Mm.
And also going back to recognizing our sense of responsibility for the deep ocean and really for the earth as well in general. I think it's also about recognizing what nature has given us and choosing to care for it. And so being stewards of that and protecting it for the future. I think also humans, we are very unique in our ability to reflect on our actions and to create technologies and to reshape our environment to suit our needs. And so we have a lot of intelligence and that gives us power. But it's also about making a choice and really asking ourselves, what is the impact that we want to have in the world around us?
Yeah, I also quickly wanted to jump in because in this conversation of stewardship, not only for us, for a lot of people, we talk about carbon a lot. And I think people really underestimate the deep ocean's role in the carbon cycle, because the deep ocean really does act as sort of a buffer. It absorbs a lot of the heat from our atmosphere, the carbon from our atmosphere, and there's a whole natural carbon cycle that takes place. And I think it's very important, especially while we are talking about climate change a lot these days, to recognize that the deep ocean has a very big role to play in that conversation. And like Elin said, that we can't think about all of these things in silos. It's really important to approach this with a sense of interconnectedness.
Yes, totally. And if listeners are interested in understanding the role that the deep ocean plays in the climate system, I highly recommend listening to episode 3 with Natalia Gallo, where we discuss these in detail. And we really talk about why the deep ocean is keeping Earth habitable.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something too that reflects what Pradeep was saying in episode 4 about the importance of bringing this kind of knowledge to international fora, to make sure that people are aware of how important deep ocean is and the role that it plays. As Pradeep was saying, to a large extent, people are willing and open to listen to these things and want to hear the facts, want to hear the science, and want to be able to use that to inform where they go next, their next steps.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Elin. And on that note, what we bring to negotiations really matters. And I want to know what you've learned from being in those spaces, especially as early career professionals. What I've noticed is that respect is essential in negotiations spaces, especially given the diversity of cultures and perspectives that are represented in that space. But I've also learned that preparing yourself is really a non-negotiable. You simply can't walk into the room and expect to keep up without having prepared for it. So, especially for early career professionals who are doing this for the first time, you really need to take a step further and study the issues and understand the positions on the table and learn the rules and dynamics of the process. So, doing your homework really helps you engage better, and trying to talk to people who have more experience, I think, is what I've taken away from being in those spaces.
Yeah, for me, I got to attend the conference on biological diversity in Cali, Colombia last year in 2024, where negotiators were sort of struggling to define the mesopelagic zone. And for our listeners, the mesopelagic zone, also known as the twilight zone, is from 200 meters to 2,000 meters is what we refer to the mesopelagic zone. So the negotiators were really struggling to sort of come up with a definition, understand what the mesopelagic is. And whereas in other spaces, I've seen that scientists are struggling to understand some technical aspect of a text. And as ECOPs, we live somewhere, I think it's our responsibility to connect the two. I think it's just about, like Michelle said, that it's about doing your homework and being enthusiastic about bridging that gap, whether it's through just like challenging yourself and doing more science communication. If you're working on something very technical, making sure that you also have a version that can be translated and shared with someone that's not from a science background. I think it boils down to an individual level.
Yeah, absolutely. And recognizing the potential that everyone brings and the knowledge that everyone brings, and how we actually need to integrate all of these perspectives and knowledge bases. So I really liked what Kerry was saying in the last episode about breaking down the elements of the 30 by 30 target into these 3 points. So effective, representative, and equitable marine protected areas. But what it actually means to action those 3 points. And of course, we can't really do that in isolation from each other. And it's important to involve all stakeholder voices from the outset and listen to these voices, properly listen. And that needs to include local and indigenous community voices too.
I love that. Kerry was also saying that developing your listening skills is so important when you're doing that, right? I really resonated with that. I was thinking about how much different that is from the scientific perspective, maybe sometimes, or it can be assumed that the skills to be a scientist are completely different. But as scientists, we also need the soft skills and people skills to be able to connect everything together in a way.
Yeah, completely. It's about the relationships, and having those relationships is what means that we're able to effectively work together. And everyone has something unique to contribute to the space. And if we listen and value each of these voices, then we'll be able to reach a sustainable and equitable future for the ocean.
Yeah, I think, Michelle, what you said about listening is definitely important. But I also think when we're at these spaces and we're hearing so many different perspectives, it's also being open to challenging your own personal perspectives. As a scientist, I think we have this set way of thinking of how something, like, we carry out an experiment and then we have results, but not everyone views things the same way. So that might challenge your perspective sometimes. So being open to that challenge and adapting to having a more holistic approach towards a particular topic, I think is also important.
I love that, Eesha.
So on that note of challenging your perspective and including different voices, how do we ensure representation of different voices and communities around the world, especially in the deep sea science world, which has been predominantly dominated by wealthier countries and just naturally countries that have more access to the deep ocean since it's expensive to get there?
Yeah, I think access is a real issue, but it doesn't mean that just because maybe you're from a landlocked country doesn't mean that you can't have a connection to the deep ocean. And, even Carrie was talking in the last episode about not recognizing earlier that coastal communities, they do have a connection to the deep ocean, even though the deep ocean is miles and miles offshore. And so having access is a really important thing. But now we're able to access the ocean through live streams, like through the Schmidt Ocean Institute or Ocean Exploration Trust. They live stream all of their deep sea dives. And so we're really able to bring the deep ocean into people's lives more. And I think this is a really powerful communication tool to be able to make sure that people do have that deeper connection with the deep ocean.
Yeah, and I also want to give a shout out to DOSI itself, because I think they do a great job in bringing together scientists, not just from the pure sciences, but also social scientists. And they make science accessible for policymakers or even, a general person that's interested in the deep sea. I think they make it really accessible for us to learn. And I think there are different avenues that help improve our access to understand or represent the deep ocean. And I just want to mention forums like YOUNGO, which is the official children and youth constituency of the United Nations, and RINGO, which is research and independent non-government organizations. And these two are sort of groups where you can get connected with and share your research about the deep ocean, or connect with other young people or researchers who are working on the issues that you care about. And I think these are really spaces that we can make use about to improve our access, because if you're from the global south, right, then you wear different hats. You can wear your global south hat, and you can also wear your scientist hat, and also wear your youth hat. So I think just making sure that the different roles we play in our daily lives are represented in different spaces equally. And that's how we sort of make sure that this challenge of access can be faced in some ways.
And we will definitely be linking Ringo and YOUNGO in the show notes.
Yeah, and they also do a very good job about sort of debunking everything that goes on in these complicated negotiations. They really put out great resources for people that are attending these places for the first time.
That's awesome. So in terms of creating more opportunities, have you heard about the Ocean Discovery League?
I have not.
So I wanted to talk about that because in terms of access and creating more opportunities for the global south and middle to low income countries. So the founder, her name is Katie Croft Bell. She created this organization because she thought we're not going to be able to explore the entire ocean if only the wealthy countries, a handful of countries are exploring it. We're not going to be able to gather all the information that we need to protect these spaces. And also the perspective is just going to be one. So she founded this organization, Ocean Discovery League, to actually expand the pool of researchers around the world who have access to the deep ocean. And they run a course that helps you to transition from shallow water research to deep sea research. And it's specifically focused on low-cost technology and learning new tools to access the deep ocean and learning about deep sea science. It's really awesome how there's more opportunities that are changing the space of deep sea science and are bringing more representation of the different communities around the world. And, the Deep Sea Roundup is a great place to find these types of resources if you're interested. So definitely signing up to the DOSI Roundup is a great resource.
And really, the deep sea community is a great thing to be a part of. Like, we're quite a small community, but we're mighty. And there's so many different ways to engage with the community. So, like, you guys have given some great examples there. And it's whether you're on the science side of it or whether you're more interested in the policy side. And DOSI is a great space for this. But I mean, just if we look at the podcast space alone, there's something for everyone. And so if you want more great content about the international negotiations that are going on, then you could listen to the Negotiating the Ocean podcast from the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security. Whereas if you're looking for something a little bit different, you could check out the Deep Sea podcast, which is run by Dr. Tom Linley and Professor Alan Jameson. And they give more of a punk rock take on all things deep sea science. So that's the great thing, is that there's so many different ways to engage with the deep ocean community.
Those are awesome resources, and we'll also be linking all of that in the notes of this episode. So with so many opportunities arising in this space, what is one thing that makes you feel excited about the future of deep ocean stewardship?
I think one thing that I am really excited about is the BBNJ Treaty, or also known as the High Seas Treaty, which took over 20 years of negotiation. And for the first time, we have a global agreement to protect biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And in case you want a whole spiel about that, please check out the episode 4 with Pradeep, where he does a wonderful job about explaining areas beyond national jurisdiction. And this includes parts of the deep sea, right? This is a historic step towards a more equitable and a science-based stewardship of the high seas. And I'm very hopeful that the discussion in negotiating spaces will shift from how we value and govern the deep ocean, not just as a resource frontier, but as a shared responsibility.
Yeah, and like Anna Metaxas mentioned in episode 2, historically, the deep ocean has not been very represented in negotiations. And so now we're seeing more of that thanks to the work of different organizations such as DOSI.
Yeah, I'm glad that's changing, and I'm glad that we have some hope towards protecting our deep sea.
Yeah, and something I'm excited about too that kind of links to all of that is the opportunities for ECOPs too. And so, like, it's about representation of the deep ocean, but also about representation for different voices. And I think the early career voices have something kind of unique, new perspectives to offer. Maybe I'm biased because the 3 of us are early career ocean professionals or ECOPs, but it's great that there's more opportunities in leadership positions for ECOPs. So like within DOSI, for example, we have several ECOP members who are actually in leadership positions now and really helping to make a difference within our working groups. I mean, we have an example right here, right? Like, Michelle, you're one of the co-leads of the climate change working group now, right?
Yes, I am. And it's been such a rewarding experience. I've been learning so much from the other co-leads and from members in the working group as well.
And I bet they're really glad about what you're bringing to the table too. You know, it's a two-way dialogue.
Yeah, and I also think it's important for early career ocean professionals to see that leadership roles are possible. So actually, speaking of early career people, what would you say to someone who is in this category and wants to be involved and make a difference?
I think we've touched a lot on some of the most important things earlier in this episode, making sure that we listen to different perspectives and have patience and be open-minded within these policy negotiations, and also make sure that we effectively communicate the science to policymakers to make sure that they have really the best chance of implementing the policy that the ocean needs. There's a slogan for the UN Ocean Decade that's like, the science we need for the ocean we want. And I think that's also true for like communicating the science too. For people just starting out, it's good to remember that everyone starts somewhere and that all it really takes is like a spark of inspiration and for the right doors to be open. And something I'd like the listeners to know is that DOSI's door is always open to support people to get involved in deep ocean stewardship. And it's kind of one of DOSI's key strengths is that we have this diversity of backgrounds represented and the richness of perspectives that can be brought to the table. And I think this is echoed really in the introduction to this podcast, which Michelle arranged, where we had DOSI members from across the world introducing DOSI at the start of this podcast. So that was a really nice way to represent that.
And I'd like to add to something Elin just said. I think sometimes it's also about creating your own doors and being, like I mentioned, enthusiastic about making a difference and volunteering to translate your science into something the general person can understand. And really just sometimes opportunities aren't very obvious and more hidden. So just really being persuasive and not being afraid to ask questions to someone that is more experienced in the field, for instance. And I think that would really equip you to be prepared, do a good job in bridging this gap with science and policy.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome advice from both of you. And if I might add, to not wait to be an expert. You don't have to know everything about deep ocean science or policy to get involved and to start. You learn on the ground and you learn by doing it. So to not be afraid to start somewhere.
Yeah, and we're really hopeful that this podcast has given people the tools to be able to go forward in their journey with deep ocean governance and deep ocean science to policy.
Yes, and if there's anything that has come out from listening to this podcast in your life and you would like to share, we're always happy to hear from you. So please share with DOSI. Thank you both for joining me today.
Yeah, and thank you so much to everyone who's been listening. It's been great.
Thanks, Michelle, for being such a wonderful host throughout all of the episodes. You've done an amazing job.
And thank you also to David Lishansky, our audio engineer from David Benjamin Sound. Thank you to our funders, Arcadia, Synchronicity Earth, the Benioff Ocean Science Laboratory, and the University of Southampton for their support. Think Deep is produced by DOSI with support from David Benjamin Sound.